Well, welcome everyone. It's hot as hell in here, but it's not as hot as Arbitrum's run this week, I guess. It all started with Robinhood announcing the L2 built on the Arbitrum stack. So I wanted to start off with congratulations and a question, like how does it feel for a company like Robinhood to choose you to try to launch their L2?
Yeah, it's so first of all, thank you for the wishes. I really appreciate it. It's a really exciting moment. I think for a long time we've had confidence that the Arbitrum technology stack, and I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit. As a platform, Arbitrum is the best platform to build on. It's very flexible. It's easy to customize. You can add scale. If you don't want to launch your own chain, you can build on Arbitrum One, which is a top 5 chain by economic activity in and of itself. And it has a ton of flexibility. So it's nice to feel that validation from a major organization like Robinhood. It's not, we're still hungry. We want to continue to grow. Like my hat says, we want Arbitrum everywhere. And it's really exciting. If you want me to sort of like describe the product and how it relates to Arbitrum, I think might be helpful to the audience.
Yeah, for sure. So from what they said, for me, Arbitrum has always been about DeFi, right? But now with this Robinhood launch, they described it as like the main place for RWAs, right? How does that play into Arbitrum's mission and vision and long-term trajectory? And is Arbitrum becoming like the RWA chain?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of people who are trying to position themselves as an RWA chain. And to me, I'm not 100% sure exactly what it means. I know what it means in the context of Robinhood. I don't know what it means in the context of generalized purpose blockchain technology. But the thesis that we had, and I think this is sort of a lot of the Arbitrum culture, is that what you're going to see is, over the last 5 years, I'd say this is DeFi summer, you've seen crypto rails being built. AMMs, order books, decentralized perps, lending platforms. And what you're seeing now, especially with more regulatory clarity, this convergence between traditional assets that are now available to come on chain and the rails that we have been building. So when Arbitrum was a DeFi chain or has that reputation as a DeFi ecosystem, it's because those were the assets, the functional and valuable assets that existed to be traded on chain. And now what we're seeing is that convergence of what we call TradFi and what we call DeFi converging into just finance. And I think, when we look forward in 10 years and we look back, and what we're going to just say is crypto rails power finance. And I think the Robinhood vision for the product is the best manifestation of that we have today. So for those that haven't seen, Robinhood did an amazing demo of the tokenized stocks available in Europe. And they put the US app side by side against the EU app, which is the tokenized stocks product. And the front ends are the exact same user experience. The only difference is at the top, instead of saying stocks, it says tokens. But other than that, it is functionally the exact same experience for those who used and love Robinhood in the United States. But under the hood, it's a completely different architecture. But the user doesn't need to know that. The user can choose to know what's running on Arbitrum. But the nice thing here is, and it's a great example of RWA assets just being powered by crypto rails. And that's what we think Arbitrum is best for. So that culture of DeFi and now RWAs, it's not that we're becoming an RWA chain. It's just that Arbitrum is the hub for where you trade things of economic value.
What I thought was very interesting from Robinhood's side is they promised to bring their entire ecosystem on chain, right? And so I wanted to ask you, maybe talk a bit about why Arbitrum. Why is that the best? Maybe go into the technicals. I know there's a lot of developers here and a lot of technical people. And so I think that would maybe be interesting to know.
Yeah. So caveat, I'm probably the least technical person in the room. I'm a real estate lawyer by trade who knows nothing about engineering. So I understand the architecture of Arbitrum, so I'll walk you through it. But if you want something a little bit less superficial, Matt is going to be joining from our team, I think, on another panel, or he'll be here. But before I get into the technical things, I want to sort of talk through what Robinhood is doing today and their vision and roadmap, their public vision and roadmap, because it actually very much relates. So what Robinhood announced on Monday was that they are launching the tokenized stock product to the EU and it went live that day. And it went live on Arbitrum 1, which again, like we said, a very liquid, DeFi-rich, battle-tested with all the infrastructure that they needed to get that product out the door. But as they look to basically recreate the Robinhood underpinnings of the product on crypto rails, they want their own chain. So the chain is not live today. We're going to be working with them to build, design, and launch the chain. But what makes Arbitrum unique, and I think one of the things that was really important to them, was that we had that flexibility to offer them both the ability to launch today on Arbitrum 1, and as they scale, to have their own chain. In a lot of other tech stacks, they might have as a core strength an SDK to launch a chain. Or they might say, we've got a super high throughput chain, and you should just use it. But it's not responsive to the developer where they are that day in the journey. Today, they might want to be on a public chain, and tomorrow they might want to be on a private chain that they can control. And we'll talk about the reasons why in a second. But Arbitrum as a platform is uniquely positioned to do that. I like to say we have a top 5 stack by adoption and a top 5 chain by economic activity. And that's a really unique proposition, which allows them to tap into liquidity today and to build their business tomorrow. From a technical perspective, some of the things that makes Arbitrum unique on the chain side, and I see Forrest in the audience, he knows from Conduit probably some of this, is we're very focused on empowering the developers to have the flexibility they want in the features. We don't think that there is, insatiable demand for generic block space. If you want to just have a generic blockchain, there's a lot of block space out there. One of the main reasons to build and launch your own blockchain is to try and convert the chain into being a part of your product. And in order to do that, you have to think through, what are your business needs? Do you want to have custom gas tokens? Do you want to have it be a private validator set? Do you want it to be KYC gated? Do you want a privacy layer so that transfers can be private? And the way we've structured the Arbitrum Orbit stack is we want you to be empowered to make whatever changes you want. We don't want you to be limited by our governance. We don't want you to be limited by our shared interoperability center. Do what you want. That's what we mean by Arbitrum everywhere. So when you see, for example, a lot of chains launching as L3s on top of Arbitrum 1, that's great. Robinhood is launching as an L2 on top of Ethereum, that's great. And we even have chains like Blackbird, like the restaurant loyalty app. That's an Arbitrum Orbit chain that's settling to Base, and that's great too, right? We just want Arbitrum to be everywhere. We want the decisions of how you can build and launch your chain to be belonging to you, and I think that was really critical. The last thing just to touch on from a technical perspective is Arbitrum Stylus. And this is something that Robinhood themselves highlighted as one of the critical decisions for them. For those of you who are developers that have built on Arbitrum, it's an EVM-compatible blockchain, like many chains that settle to Ethereum or other L2s and L1s. What makes Arbitrum somewhat unique is Stylus. So Stylus, for those unfamiliar, is a second virtual machine that sits side by side with the EVM that allows you to code in Rust, C, and C++, really other languages that compile to WASM. And what's nice about this is you don't have to make a choice. Say, I want to launch an EVM chain, or I want to launch a Rust chain. You can do both. You can have 70% of your code base be in Rust and 30% be in Solidity. Or you can pull in cryptographic libraries if you need for privacy or advanced cryptography. And Arbitrum is a unique environment. So that flexibility that we have in terms of how to design the product, what languages you should use, where you should launch the product, is really a core component of our thesis.
So to me, it sounds that you guys provide full control over the chain, the stack, and everything. Why is this such an important part of a decision making for a company like Robinhood and maybe other more traditional companies that can be motivated to come and build on Arbitrum?
Yeah, I think it has to do with flexibility and optionality, right? This is a very fast-moving industry. It's very fast-moving technology, and also very fast-moving from a regulatory perspective. What compliance things are necessary or what features you want to implement are going to need to move. And to maintain maximum flexibility, not be limited because you're locked into an interoperability set or shared governance, to just have full control is something that's really resonated. And it allows also from a product perspective to make your chain be a part of your product. And we're seeing that more and more in the design of orbit chains that are coming to market.
So let's talk about the regulation for a bit, because you're obviously based in New York, and there's been a huge shift in, vibes and regulation over there. What did you see was like the biggest pivot that allows like all these TradFi companies to come on chain? And what else would you say needs to happen for that to be like amplified even more?
I think the most obvious one is probably the change in administration. I think that the new SEC is being very forward thinking.
We love the SEC now.
They're being very thoughtful. They're engaging with the community. They're engaging with developers. They're trying to build policies that allow the industry to flourish in the United States. We've seen MiCA in Europe come with a very robust framework. That's what Robinhood is using for their tokenized stocks in Europe. So regulation and sensible responsiveness to the solving of the problems using crypto rails, I would say, is critical. I think what we've also seen, and this is even before the new administration, BlackRock launching a money market fund, I think was a watershed moment with BUIDL. I think that, that was sort of an early mover thing that you don't typically see from, massive asset managers, and Franklin Templeton as well. So I think that some of the work that was done on money market funds by the largest asset managers in the world, the work that was done by Robinhood to get regulatory clarity, by, again, potentially like one of the largest, stock trading platforms in the world on crypto rails, I think that willingness to do that work is really, I think, what's accelerated the last 6 months.
Yeah, it's so funny because Joe Lubin from Consensus went on Bankless the other week, and he was like, "We love the SEC now," and the guys were like, "What did you say?" So that was super funny. Let's talk about the RWAs and narrative. Like me personally, I'm super bullish on RWAs and all the assets coming on chain. What would you say are like maybe a couple companies or projects that we should be all like watching for? Maybe from the Arbitrum ecosystem or like overall crypto that is like really important?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the term RWAs, I think, is going to have a short life in the sense that, like, I think in the next 2 years, we're just going to think about valuable assets trading on very efficient operating systems, which is crypto rails. And I think what's clear is that stablecoins have historically had the most product market fit. And in particular segments like enabling people in developing countries access to US dollars, fast and efficient remittances. So those are the sort of the things that I think are very obvious. What we've started doing is money market funds. And I think that that's a really easy vertical and category to bring on chain. It doesn't require a lot of diligence. You have to doesn't require much to understand the product. It's similar to tokenized equities, right? If you know how to trade traditional equities, it's the exact same thing. What I think we're starting to see is more advanced structured products, private credit are starting to come on chain. I think we've seen that happen a lot on the supply side. I think the demand side for these products is still a little bit more limited. What I like is, and I'll just, I'll name drop one team building in the Arbitrum ecosystem. There's a lot. Obviously, we're excited about, many different teams.
Alpha.
But like one organization I spoke with the founder this morning, Spyro, is basically just offering a very efficient way for European companies to get access to treasury bills. It's not as easy as it is in America to get access to like money market funds. And a lot of their customers are non-crypto native startups. This is just the easiest way for them to get savings on their treasury management. And I think in 4 months on Arbitrum, they have $150 million. And it's not like crypto native companies or teams or organizations that are at the forefront of it. It's just startups and they're solving a problem. So it's very thematic with what I was saying about Robinhood and tokenized stocks. I think what I'm excited about is how does blockchain power real world problems? So how do we use what we call RWAs coming on chain and flip it? How instead of RWAs coming on chain, how does blockchain solve the problems that exist in the real world?
Very cool. And for the investors here in the audience, obviously I'm with Milkroad. We have, a very focused audience on investing. what would you say are the ways to get exposure to this whole narrative, and what should people hold to benefit from the long-term like adoption of RWAs?
It's a good question. I don't know.
Not financial advice.
Not financial advice. I think that, I'm not going to give financial advice. I don't know. That's probably not a good idea.
Sorry to put you on the
I
spot.
think, though, that what we're seeing is there is a lot of demand for exposure to this, right? Like the Circle stock on the, since it went live, it obviously exploded. I think that there's a lot of picks and shovels across like traditional DeFi, asset managers, even chains that I think can capture a lot of value from the utility that they create. I don't think in order to get exposure to it, you need to hold the underlying asset. That's like probably the wrong trade. But think about what parts of the stack are contributing the most value to this exploding, because I think it's inevitable.
Yeah, look where the value accrues. I have two sort of like question about Arbitrum specifically. One of them is, what metrics are you guys watching for? What are you optimizing for? What do you expect to happen in the next few years here?
It's a great question, because the answer is in some ways like none and all of them. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of talk now about like revs, like that's like the new hot meta. The reality is if you're not thinking about revenue, then you're not really building a business, in my opinion. So revenue is obviously absolutely critical. I think the nuanced version of that question is much more, what is the form of revenue that you are earning? And what we've seen over the last 18 months is that, the most valuable revenue for a blockchain comes from sort of MEV related to meme coin trading. And that's like, if you want to optimize for that, and again, I'm not passing judgment at all whatsoever, then you're going to probably have had a ton of revenue over the last 12 months. And it might be a strategy to do because, again, revenue is critical. I would say we haven't optimized for revenue on Arbitrum. Sort of those more consumer, social experiment where there's probably less concept sensitivity and less sensitivity to MEV has not been our priority to date. DeFi, I would say perps trading, which again is actually a very valuable revenue generator. But this convergence of RWAs and the DeFi rails that we've been building has been our priority. Our thesis is that over time, that will drive a lot more revenue to Arbitrum, and I'll talk about that in a second. So maybe from that metric, I care about TVL, but I do, but not really. That's why I'm kind of answering the question, but I'm giving you more of a thought process than an actual answer. The reason for that is TVL can be like very latent and not move, or it can be like extremely high velocity. And that also matters. And what I mean by that is if you look at like RWAs today, like I mentioned earlier, you might see like a lot of TVL, but it really doesn't move. And that's not maximizing revenue. In the future, that might get to a point where revenue can be generated from it. But right now, we're just trying to have Arbitrum have a place everywhere. And to bring this together, like for context, the way we think about revenue is we have three main revenue streams as inputs into Arbitrum. Transaction fees on Arbitrum 1. So that's always existed. Arbitrum used to run a first come, first serve model of transactions. About 2 months ago, we changed that. The DAO voted to implement something called Time Boost. And if you want to, I'll talk about that for a second. It's actually quite interesting. Time Boost has generated in the 2 months about a little more than $2 million for the Arbitrum DAO. What Time Boost does is it tries to balance a user experience and the inevitable nature of MEV that exists on blockchains. So what other blockchains have done, and is typical in the Ethereum ecosystem, is something called the priority gas auction. If you want to be at the top of the block, you pay the most money and your transaction to the top. It makes it easier to either front run if there's a public mempool, or sandwich, or back run, right? And people are willing to pay for that to be higher. The reason we didn't historically, amongst others, go for a priority gas auction model is because in order for this to be maximally effective, you actually want longer block times. Because the shorter the block time, the less valuable it is to be at the top of a block, intuitively. So we didn't like that. So we introduced something called the first come, first serve model. And that allowed us, and a lot of people talk about this as a critical feature today, that allowed Arbitrum in 2021 to have 250 millisecond block times, which to me, from a product perspective, was one of the things that unlocked perps doing really well on chain on Arbitrum, because we had super fast block times. Today everyone talks about this as like table stakes, but Arbitrum's had this for about 4 years. The problem with first come, first serve is inevitably everybody tries to co-locate with the sequencer, and there's just a latency race. So the real benefit of a first come, first serve model is like AWS. So what did Time Boost do? Time Boost is not intended to maximize revenue. It's intended to maximize these two different things that we're trying to do, which is there's plenty of users that don't care about MEV or latency racing, but we want them to have 250 millisecond block times. And there's many of sophisticated players that they want to do this. So it creates an auction mechanism where for every minute there's an auction. And you can basically, if you win the auction, you have a stream of 100-second head start on transactions in the traditional pool. You can't see those transactions. So you can't front run with this, but it gives you the ability to buy the right to back run. So it limits the reasons to have latency racing, and it internalizes into the Arbitrum DAO a lot of the revenue. So like we said, right now it's annualizing at about a $15 million a year profit for the Arbitrum DAO. That could grow as sort of different MEV opportunities. There's only two main players right now competing over it, but as more players enter into the auction space, that could grow. So that's the second core revenue stream of Arbitrum. The third is the Arbitrum expansion program, which is related to Robinhood. So if you launch an L3 chain that settles to Arbitrum 1, that's a free version of using the stack. It's permissionless. You don't have to talk to anyone. You don't have to pay anything. If you want to launch an L2 that settles to Ethereum, or an L3 that settles to Base, or really anywhere else, we have something called the Arbitrum expansion program, which is a 10% share with the Arbitrum DAO, in which you share your revenues or profits, whatever the formula is precisely, around transaction fees and if you implement Time Boost that as well. So those are the three, and cut me off if I'm going too long. Those are the three core revenue inputs into the Arbitrum DAO. What makes Arbitrum unique, though, is these revenues flow directly into an on-chain treasury wallet controlled by token holders. That's actually very unique amongst L2s. To the best of my knowledge, every other L2, it flows into like a wallet controlled by the foundation, which again, if you think about it from like a corporate governance perspective, is very different, right? You don't have an ownership right over something that exists in a foundation, but you have control on Arbitrum 1, DAO's treasury, if you need a token vote in order to take these assets out. So, and what that allows us to do is, and the Arbitrum DAO's treasury has right now about somewhere around 25,000 ETH and about $50 million worth of stables on top of all of the, I think it's around 2.5 billion ARB that sits in the treasury today. It allows you to compound growth. Because where other L1s, for example, they give all their transaction fees out to stakers and validators, because Arbitrum doesn't need to do that as an L2 for security reasons, it can maintain the revenue that it generates and compound growth. So we've done things like deploy some of the Arbitrum DAO's assets into DeFi to earn yield and continue to compound growth. We've purchased on behalf of the Arbitrum DAO about $50 million worth of treasuries in order to fulfill our dual mandate of compound the demand for the blockchain technology stack and also grow the treasury base of the DAO. So the fundamental architecture of Arbitrum has allowed it to generate very diversified revenue sources from what I like to call the natural resources, which is the blockchain, and also the businesses that we can establish on top.
Awesome. Revenue is always super important. I have one last question, and then I want to sort of like open up to the public. It's July 2nd, 2026, so a year from now. Tell me what Arbitrum as the ecosystem looks like a year from now.
Yeah, it's a great question. Because if you asked me that a year ago, I don't know if I would have said what I would say today. So I think that the trajectory that we're looking for is Arbitrum, not as a chain, but as a platform. Again, the Arbitrum One public chain and the Orbit stack that enables abundance of creativity is going to collectively be where TradFi and DeFi meet. And we're going to have the crypto rails to power that and convert it just into simply finance. And maybe we're not going to say that next year, but if we do this on July 2nd, 2035, I'm confident everybody in this room is going to just refer to all of this as finance, using DeFi rails, using crypto rails, blockchain rails, to power what we now call RWAs to just be existing assets that live in the world.
Awesome. I want to open up some questions. We're almost at time here. Maybe we have 5 more minutes. You want to go first?
First question. I have a question regarding money market funds. You seem to be sort of advocate the tokenization and bring them to Arbitrum. Now, our friend here from Milkroad saying that he wants exposure into RWA. Now, reality is money market funds only paying something like 4%. That's hardly exciting for crypto degens. So how do you actually reconcile between the liquidity that would be needed to for the RWAs and also increasing the velocity of RWA once they becomes tokenized?
Yeah, it's a great question. So my personal answer for this is right now, the ecosystem is very focused on bringing money market funds and trying to make them appeal to crypto native users. And the problem is they're doing that with one hand behind their back, because today it's very hard to actually integrate these products into DeFi where you can stack yields. It's very hard to post them as collateral into perps, right? Everyone's still using stablecoins for this. So in many ways, and this is what I said earlier, you see abundance of supply, but limitations of demand. So I think that two things are happening that is going to change that. The first is regulatory clarity. And we're starting to see this a bit with some of like the Morpho vaults that are being curated by like Gauntlet and Stakehouse, which is stacking the yields. We're going to get more creative structured products that will enable yield stacking essentially for money market funds. That's the first. The second is, and I actually have a third I was just thinking about. The second is instead of focusing, and this is why I love Spyro and I highlighted them earlier, instead of focusing solely on crypto native organizations as the demand side for these products, we need to do what Spyro and what Robinhood are doing, which is how do we make this product just be objectively better to anybody who wants access to money market funds. They don't need to be crypto native. They just need to have the best experience. And this is the best way to buy money market funds. And if we do that, it's $1 trillion industry. The third is, and this is less about money market funds and more about RWAs broadly, is we're moving further along the risk curve. So private credit is getting tokenized. Obviously, equities are getting tokenized. And yes, money market funds might sort of be more limited in their upside if, rates, change, which it looks like they will. But I think what we're just going to see is just, a lot like we have in the traditional financial world, just a larger smorgasbord of yields along the curves.
Thanks for the question. Thanks for the answer. We have one more question over there.
I'd just like to know how Arbitrum got started. So Web3 infrastructure is fiercely competitive. Most of the L1s now just don't make it. How did you guys make it? How did you guys get so much liquidity, so much transactions, so much adoption?
Are you asking from like a technical perspective or from an ecosystem perspective?
Not technical perspective. Ecosystem is not the
ecosystem. Okay, so this one's actually in my court because if it was technical, I was just going to punt. Ecosystem. What's like the secret sauce? Okay, if I'm being honest, I think some of it was being lucky. Right? We launched at a time when the world was craving scale, and we delivered the first permissionless public open L2. And I think that, I think it's very important to like remain humble and recognize that a lot of what happens in life is luck. So I think that, for example, if we launched in 2023, I don't know if we would have been in the same position, and I think that it would be like really unreasonable and unfair to say that the circumstances would have allowed us to just have the same level of success. So I want to sort of remain grounded that I would say luck and timing, maybe less so luck, but more so timing, was a critical factor in our success. I think, though, beyond that, if I'm talking about sort of things that me and my team are doing from a cultural perspective, I think we've remained extremely focused on what we're trying to do, right? Which is build products that we think are going to solve the real world problems or a very long time horizon. And a lot of the builders that we attract have that confidence that because they know we're not optimizing for something that's going to happen in 3 months, we're not optimizing for something, they feel confident to go along that journey with us. And it's actually a really, really important component of this. There's a lot of liquidity that moves around. There's a lot of developers that build like multi-chain theses because they're trying to capture, and I'm not even being critical of them. Crypto is like extremely competitive and you have to balance the short term and the long term. But I think from a brand and reputation perspective, and this maybe does relate to the technology, I think people recognize that we're not trying to do something short-sighted, and it gives them the confidence to build alongside us, which creates a lot of very valuable compounding effects.
Cool. We have time for one more question, do we? All right. Anyone have one last question? Going once, going twice? No. Then we'll end it there.
Okay. Thank you so much. This is great.